That's our topic. All of the teachings in the next 4 weeks will be connected with this idea. Love in a culture of outrage. So, 2022. Great time to be alive, right? Now see, if you laughed at that, then you already understand the basic premise of this series. Okay? This is a wild time to be a part of our culture. Our culture is having a moment, and there's a lot of emotions. There's a lot to argue about. We're in this pandemic right now, which gives us all kinds of things to argue about. We can argue about masks and vaccines. We've got a supply chain shortage, and we've got a worker shortage, and we can argue about who's to blame for that. We've got hot-button topics like climate change and abortion and racial justice and CRT. We've got the last election cycle that we can argue about. And then we've got the next election cycle. We can argue about that too. And also there's a coin shortage. Like, what's that? I don't even understand that one at all. I have no position on the coin shortage. But kind of underneath all of these flashpoints, there's this current in our culture where there's something happening in the culture. Some people call it the culture wars, where there's kind of this tug-of-war, arm wrestling match over which voices are going to dominate in our culture, which voices are going to write the narrative, which voices are going to get the biggest slice of the cultural pie. And that battle is happening in relationships. It's happening at work, it's happening at the dinner table, it's happening online, it's happening among friends or sometimes between friends. And I think that it's safe to say that it's ratcheting up and not improving. Derek Robertson is a journalist at Politico. He published an article this week, and here's the title. He said, "I predicted the culture wars would end in 2021. Oops. Yeah, okay, I think we can probably agree. And by the way, it's not like Christians are off to the side of all this observing from some perch. No, Christians are totally drawn in, completely invested in the quote-unquote culture wars, often contributing to the problem as bad as or worse than others. So this is not a critique on culture from the outside. This is a critique on culture from the inside. So what we thought would be good, it would be good to put together a series of Bible teachings that, not to address these topics that I brought up, but instead passages that speak to how we as Christians can navigate this world that we live in. What's it look like to follow Christ through a culture that is at each other's throat? And what are the principles that will help us navigate? And we're inspired in large part by this book called Christians in the Age of Outrage by Ed Stetzer. Now you get where we got the title from. We ripped it off from Stetzer. What's he going to do? Get outraged, right? No, I'm just kidding. We really like Stetzer, and I think this book has some real insights. His basic observation is he calls this moment in our culture the age of outrage. And he's got this observation that for a variety of reasons at this point in history, a lot of this is ratcheted up as high as it's ever been. And he points out that part of this has to do with the increasing secularization over time of our culture. Because, we've always had things to disagree about. We've always had issues to vote on. We've always had parties, teams, or whatever. The difference is that as people look for a place to sort of base their identity, if your identity isn't based in God or some theological background, then increasingly people are rooting their identity in their cause or their party or their faction. And what that does is it ramps up the personalization. So if we don't agree on issue one, you're for it and I'm against it, then it isn't just that we disagree on issue one, it's that you're against my people, because my people are the issue one people. And when you stand against issue one, you're standing against me on an identity level. And so what that does is it cranks up the feelings, it cranks up the suspicion and demonization of the other team, It cranks up my own loyalty and blindness for my team as I sort of go into this echo chamber where there's not room for civil discourse. We're just telling ourselves the same thing and becoming increasingly intolerant of any other ideas. And the result is an explosion of vitriol and division. Here's what he says. He says, this is a book about outrage. It's an acknowledgement that our world, or at least our part in it, seems awash in anger, division, and hostility. Outrage is all around, so we have to decide how to walk through this. We are living in a day, and this is indeed our moment, when we need to live like Christ, as gospel Christians in the midst of shouting, anger, and hatred. And it's going to get worse. His point is that as Christians, look, we have a decision to make. Are we going to dive into the culture wars and roll up our sleeves and our keyboards and get to work battling for some cause? Or are we going to shrink back and retreat and be intimidated? Or, as he's suggesting here, as usual, Jesus Christ has a third and different way. Culture forces you into this box or that box. Jesus is a provocative character because he comes out and says, let's go a different way. From the heavenly point of view, this all looks a lot different. And so that's kind of my challenge in starting off here is, I don't know where you're at with all this. I don't know how angry you'll be at me by the end of this teaching. I wager my odds are pretty decent because there's a lot of you in this room. But if you came here hoping that I was going to stoke up your outrage, you'll be disappointed. But here's my challenge, regardless of where you are, is this is a Bible study, so let's hear what the Bible has to say. Take a minute and set aside your instincts and inclinations and give Jesus a chance to give you a fresh take, because I think that there is something very unique and special and different about the way that the Bible views the roiling human divisions that we see. So, let's see. For my contribution, I decided to focus on this question of loving outrageous people. Loving people who drive you insane. Okay, so on the spectrum, there's us versus them. We're thinking about them today. Who is over there in the them category for you? And what does the Bible say about them? That's the topic that I chose for some reason. And so I thought what would be good, I want to flip over briefly, just to get our appetite here. I want to read an example where Jesus interacts with an outrageous person. In Luke chapter 19, verse 1. Here's what it says. It says, he entered Jericho and was passing through. And there was a man called by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. Zacchaeus was trying to see who Jesus was and was unable because of the crowd, for he was small in stature. So here's this character in Jericho, a wealthy town, and what does Luke, the author, want us to get about him? Main thing is to see that he's the chief tax collector. Now, being a tax collector in the ancient world was a big deal. They were hated. Not just because, IRS, I hate to pay my taxes. Not that, because at this time, Rome has conquered and subjugated Israel. And so these are taxes paid to an oppressive conqueror. And the way Rome collected their taxes is they hired indigenous local people. They hired men and women to go and collect taxes from their own countrymen. And so they were viewed as traitors. They were contributing to the oppression of their own people. Zacchaeus is not just a tax collector, he's the chief tax collector. He's the boss, which would make him incredibly powerful. He sets the tax policy for the city. He hires the tax collectors. He could search property. He could seize property. He could search your individual person. And he does all this with the authority of armed Roman soldiers at his back. Immensely powerful. He would have been fabulously rich. This is a job that you get rich at. Because the way it worked was you contracted to collect a certain amount of taxes. Whatever you extorted beyond that was yours to keep. That's how you made your profit. So ordinary tax collectors were rich. He's the boss. He's probably absurdly rich. He's probably one of the most wealthiest people in this town. They were also known for being corrupt because they have this system set up that is basically set up for them to exploit people. And they did. They could be bribed. They tended to hit harder the poor, farmer-type people because those people had no recourse against a rich, powerful man like Zacchaeus. And so they're notorious. Everyone would have known the name of the chief tax collector in town. He is a traitor. He has betrayed his people. They wouldn't have even viewed him as part of their nation. You know, he's gone to the other side. He's made a devil's deal with Rome, and he's sold himself all for the chance to be rich and powerful, and he cheats at that. And so this would have been a just reviled, hated man, and Luke also tells us he was short. That doesn't have anything to do with him being... I'm just telling you the facts, okay? Not down on short people. Oh, God, I've already offended them. All right. Verse 4, so he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree in order to see him, for he was about to pass through that way. So here comes Jesus with this whole crowd of people crowding around him, wanting to catch a glimpse of him, wanting to see him. And Zacchaeus, who's short of stature, can't see. So he goes out down the route where he thinks Jesus is going to go and climbs up a tree where he might be able to catch a glimpse of Jesus. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for today I must stay at your house. Which is a weird verse, right? Here's this whole crowd. He's in the middle of the city, and he stops and he says, you, Zacchaeus, he knows his name. Come down, I must stay at your house. Which sounds kind of rude to us. Like if I said, hey, I'm staying at your house tonight, that'd be rude. Not in their culture. In their culture, it's the exact inverse because showing someone hospitality was a way of gaining social clout and power. You would invite important people to your house, hoping they'd come, because if they come, then that elevates your status, and they might reciprocate. That's how you climb the social ladder. It's like having a celebrity follow you on Twitter. That'd be a great honor. And so probably everyone's thinking, who's going to have the honor of having Jesus stay at their house? And he looks up and he's like, you, I'm staying with you. And so Zacchaeus hurries and comes down and received him gladly. He's tremendously honored by this. Well, when they saw it, they all began to grumble, saying, he has gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Right? They're like, well, Zacchaeus? He came to our town, and he's staying with Zacchaeus? It's normal for Jesus to alienate some people in every crowd. What's a little unusual here is the whole crowd. These are Jesus fans, and they're all like, oh, come on. What is he doing? Why are they scandalized by this? Well, it's bad manners. It's socially corrosive. He's honoring the biggest scoundrel in the city. He's lowering his own social credit by doing so. And I'm sure there's probably some jealousy here too. My house is pretty nice. Like, I'm a pretty good person. But no, he's going to stay with Zacchaeus. But Jesus, of course, knows exactly what he's doing. He understands he's breaking the social norm. And he walks in there and he's like, that rich dude up in the tree, that's my guy. Well, they go off then to Zacchaeus' house. It says Zacchaeus received him. Later it says Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, half of my possessions I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will give back 4 times as much. So this is a radical thing that Zacchaeus is saying. What's he saying? He's saying 2 things, actually. He's like, you know what? I need to make restitution. If I've defrauded anyone, I'm going to pay him back 4 times. That's actually that's a wild restitution. That's in the Old Testament. That's the payback for theft. If you steal something, you're supposed to pay it back 4 times. And on top of that, half of all my possessions I'm giving away to the poor. This is an incredibly generous, this is an unbelievable 180 that we're seeing here from Zacchaeus. A sudden and dramatic transformation, and Jesus immediately celebrates it. It says, Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and save that which is lost." Often in these events where there's a story, Jesus will sometimes interject sort of a proverb, like a teaching, a moral of the story. And here's the moral of the story here. The Son of Man, that's Jesus. He says, "I want everyone to know, salvation has come to this house because I have come to seek and save that which is lost." So that's our story. And of course, there's a ton we could say about it. I want to focus, though, on one detail, which is how the crowd viewed Zacchaeus as completely different from Jesus. Like, clearly, the crowd and Jesus are not on the same page about this situation. They're viewing it through different lenses. So what can we imagine? What's the crowd's lens? What do you think of, it says they're grumbling. That usually has words. What do you think they were saying when they grumbled? I imagined it's stuff like, "Ugh, he's Zacchaeus. It's disgusting. He is one of them, and he'll never be one of us. He doesn't deserve honor. He deserves shame and punishment. A guy like that, he should not be honored. That's not even right. He should be called out. He should be ruined. He should be defeated. He should be locked up, or I wish he would just die." And so this is totally unfair. This is not an okay outcome. I'm sure those were the kinds of things that they were saying. In short, the crowd was outraged. Outraged about Zacchaeus and outraged that Jesus gave him the time of day. Sound familiar? I think our culture is vibing with the crowd. And you know what? To be totally honest, I'm vibing with the crowd. Look at this situation. Look at those bullet points there, or those call-out bubbles. Can you disagree with any of them? It's pretty hard to argue with any of those points. Those things are all true. And so think about, in our culture, what does our culture say that you should think about them? Whoever is them to you. What are you supposed to think about them? Probably all of these things right here. What do you think about the people who disgust you? You probably think, "Ooh, they're disgusting. They're one of them, never be one of me, and they don't deserve honor. They deserve shame and punishment, and I hope they get defeated, and it's so unfair." So what? If all those things are true, then did Jesus get the situation wrong? Is Jesus just misreading Zacchaeus? Does he have poor judgment of character? It's either that or that Jesus has a completely different lens. He sees and acknowledges all these things are true, and yet there's some other compelling reason to be nice to this man. So what is the contrast? Here's, I think, the million-dollar question here. Why did Jesus choose Zacchaeus? Why did he do that? He could have chosen anybody. He picked him. The answer is taught by Jesus right here in verse 10. Why did he pick him? Because the Son of Man has come to seek and save that which is lost. Because Jesus is on a mission to rescue lost things. And Zacchaeus was definitely lost. Zacchaeus was pursuing money and power and his God, and what did it got him? Look how Zacchaeus, it says in verse 4, it says he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree. He ran. He didn't jog. He ran, and then he climbed a tree like a kid. It's a pretty undignified thing for the most wealthy, powerful guy in town. It tells me that he really wanted to catch a glimpse of Jesus. He was desperate to see Jesus. I think that Zacchaeus was lost, and I think Zacchaeus knew it. Here's a guy who's got all the money and power you could ever want, and yet he's not satisfied. He's got all the money and power you could ever want, and yet he's desperate to catch a glimpse of the guy who befriends sinners and forgives sin. He's got everything you could ever want, and yet he's hollow and he's empty. He's a wretch and a slave, and he knows it, and everyone else knows it too. There's a saying that we like to go our own way until we don't. Do you know what I mean by that? It's that as human beings, we've got this impulse to be like, I can figure this out. I've got my instincts. I don't need God or anybody else. I think I know my way. And we love to go our own way until the day comes when we're like, oh man, I'm not sure I should be at the wheel. We love our own way until we don't. And I think Zacchaeus was at that point. Here's a Jeeth Fernando. This is kind of a blistering quote, but it's good. He says, if you don't surrender to God, don't think you don't surrender. Everybody surrenders to something. Some surrender to themselves as God. If you surrender to yourself as God, then you won't like your God. You'll do as you like, and then you won't like what you do. You'll express yourself, and you won't like the self you express. You won't like yourself, and no one will like you either. Oh, man. That's why I put it in a quote, so I didn't have to say it. Too far, Fernando, too far. Just kidding. Zacchaeus was lost, and he knew it, and Jesus knew it too, because he is the one who called him out. He looked up and he said, I have to come stay with you tonight. And Zacchaeus hurried down. Jesus saw that he was lost and ready to be found, and lost is Jesus' business. He's like a heat-seeking missile for people who understand, maybe I need to surrender to God. And so he seeks. He tells him, I must stay at your house, which is not a weird translation. That's actually what it says, and it is weird. It's what theologians sometimes call a divine urgency. It is imperative. I have to come to you right now. So what we're seeing here is, while the crowd viewed Zacchaeus one way, Jesus is viewing him in this totally different way. As a lost person, that is his paradigm for viewing people. How do you view people? We have all kinds of different grids for viewing people. We usually put them in categories. Your race, your gender, your sexual preference, your neighborhood, your political party, your worldview, your team, your faction, your socioeconomic status, whatever it is. We group people into these different compartments, and we say, that is the most important thing about you. God does not overlook those differences. He acknowledges them and their importance. He just says, it's not the most important thing about you. For Jesus, his lens wasn't whether you were in this group or that group. His lens was, are you lost or are you found? But there's two kinds of people. There's people who have been reconciled with the God who made them, and there's people who have not yet. And that is how Jesus saw the world. And for that reason, he's constantly moving toward lost people, even the most reviled and hated kind. He's constantly, he walks into a crowd, and who does he seek out? The criminals, the prostitutes, the poor people, the sinners, the people who have disabilities. He sought out foreigners like Samaritans and Gentiles. He sought out Romans who were oppressing them and people who persecuted him. Jesus is constantly finding the most offensive person in the crowd. Why? Because it's the sick who need a doctor, he said. So he treated him, he saw through all the other things and said, that guy's lost, and that man has dignity. He saw a human dignity in Zacchaeus. Stetzer says, Zacchaeus was still an image bearer who wanted to relate to his Creator. Even if Zacchaeus did not understand where this desire originated, Jesus responded to it. Jesus looked past Zacchaeus' worldly identity and called out to him, saw Zacchaeus as a reflection of his own glory buried under the brokenness of sin. And predictably, those who saw their exchange were angry because they could not see past Zacchaeus' social status and sin. They could not understand why Jesus would spend time with a man who, in their estimation, did not deserve love. And yet Jesus did show him dignity, acceptance. I'm coming over to your house. Why? Because he too is a son of Abraham. He viewed him with potential, that he saw that this guy doesn't always have to be the corrupt tax guy in town. He could be something different. He viewed him with mercy. Mercy is when you hold back the judgment that's deserved He showed him mercy, and then on top of that, he showed him honor. He honored him by choosing him and going to his house. Basically, Jesus showed him love. And importantly, it was love that he did not deserve. And that's what was so shocking about this event. That's what scandalized the crowd, and that's what melted the stony heart of Zacchaeus. Love that you don't deserve, that's called grace. And it is one of the most beautiful concepts in the Bible, the idea that God has the ability to choose to extend love and favor to you when you don't deserve it. And he does this out of his own character and goodness. And what's the result? The result was that Zacchaeus was saved. What does Jesus say? Today, salvation has come to this house. Because Jesus is not just on a mission to seek, but also to save. And so I want to make sure you understand what this means, because it has so much gravity. That the Bible says that each and every person is born in this broken world that is alienated from God. And therefore, our big problem is that we need a relationship with the God who made us. We need that healed, and we can't do that on our own because of our own sin. Jesus' mission was to remove that problem of sin by standing in our place on the cross, by paying for our sins. So that the offer of the Bible is that any person, anywhere, no matter how good or bad or whatever group you're in, that anyone anywhere can come and say, I want Jesus to pay for my sins on the cross. I want to surrender to you instead of myself or money or something else. I want to begin a relationship with the God who created me. And that is something that anyone can do. And Jesus is announcing, he's like, hey, I want everyone to see. I want everyone to know that Zacchaeus, the worst reprobate in town, is saved. He's mine. He'll be in eternity with heaven, in heaven with me forever. Now, maybe you're thinking, was Zacchaeus saved because he gave his money to the poor? No, don't think that. Listen, the New Testament is clear. All the money in the world can't come close to touching the debt of our sin. Only the blood of Christ could pay for our sin. What you're seeing here, is Zacchaeus giving his money away as a response to the grace that he's been shown. Salvation is a free gift, John 1:12. To all who believed him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. The order goes, you start out as lost, then God shows you love and favor and calls out to you when you don't deserve it. And when you respond to that, you're saved on his ticket, not yours. And when that all clicks, this love of God that I did not deserve, it generates a response in people, and sometimes that response is eye-popping, like what happened here with Zacchaeus, because it clicks. I've been loved by God. I'm completely and permanently, irrevocably loved by God. But what else do I have to worry about? Take my money. I don't need it. I have a rich dad. Jesus is saying what you're seeing is not just a change of heart or a bold resolution. It is salvation in action. It is a transformation. It is a man who suddenly looks, what did Jesus do? He was just kind to him. He just said, I want to honor you and come to your house. And Zacchaeus is like, you're my God. Lord, take my life. When it clicks, God's love for us, this is the thing that turns people's lives right inside out. Grace is a scandal. And when we experience it, it revolutionizes our lives. And that is what happened in this story with Zacchaeus. It can happen to you. It can happen to the people you love. It can happen to the people you hate. Because Jesus has come to seek and save that which is lost. So what's the key difference between Jesus' take on this take and the crowd's take on Zacchaeus? The difference is they responded with outrage and he responded with love. It's not like he didn't see the awful things about Zacchaeus. He just judged that what he needed, that rejection wasn't going to actually help. That what he needed was love. And so this is what I want to wrestle with the rest of our time. This kind of shocking implicit point here is that Jesus loves disgusting people. My original title for this teaching was Loving Disgusting People, but I thought nobody would actually come to that. So now you're trapped, and I can actually say what I really mean, which is this is about loving disgusting people. Zacchaeus was a disgusting person. Are you beginning to feel the challenge of Jesus' example here? If you're sitting here this morning and you're like, I think of myself as a follower of Jesus Christ. Okay, that's cool. Jesus loved disgusting people. And that means so should we. That's the very uncomfortable tension that's probably causing you to grumble right now in your heart. That we have a choice which example we want to follow. You can go with the flow of our outraged culture, which is what most Christians do. That's the path of least resistance. You can join the fray of the culture wars. I'm amazed how many Christians I know will, on the one hand, talk about their love for all mankind, and in the same breath will write off entire swaths of humanity as too disgusting to love, as my mortal enemy for life who must be defeated at all costs. Those two things they're kind of incongruous here. Here's Stetzer. He says, some Christians post Bible verses professing the love of Christ, only to follow that with hostile, if not derogatory insults against some political, cultural, or religious figure. When claims to being joy-filled are mixed with disparaging comments about a politician, it strikes onlookers as oddly disjointed. People believe our love is worthless when we cheapen it in this way. More important, they assume Christian love must be contingent upon political, economic, or cultural positions. That you have to agree with me on the cultural stuff in order to become a Christian. That's the impression it gives. This reduces our claims to merely another form of tribalism. We're just staking out our corner. I'll fight for my tribe, like everyone else. So we can do that, or we can follow after the way of Jesus, which is the way of loving your enemies. That's one of God's great superpowers, is the ability to love those who hate him. And the Bible says that he loved all of us while we were enemies, while we took up a posture of enemies of God, he yet loved us. And that is what he does, and that is what we are to do. And so you're like, well, great, how do we do that? And I mean, we could talk, there's many things we could say about following the pattern of Jesus, but I just want to focus on one, which is to think about how we think about other people. How do I view, just like Jesus viewed Zacchaeus through a different lens than the crowd, although the crowd's lens was understandable, through what lens do I view the people who disgust me? So we need to see people the way that God sees them. I'm going to have an instinctive way of seeing them, but God probably sees them differently than I do. And so the project then becomes aligning my view with his. And so I'm going to give you three things, three kind of principles for viewing people who drive you bananas. All right? Number one, we need to view them as image bearers. View them as image bearers. In Genesis 5, it says that when God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. That according to the Bible, there's something unique and special about human beings. He created all creation and he said, it is good, it is good, it is good. When he created men and women, he said, it is very good. Why? Because there's something about human beings that bear a hallmark or an imprint. There's something God-like. He put a little of himself in humanity, and that makes them stand out as unique and special. Something about the way that we think, or the way that we choose, or the way that we relate with love, or the way that we create. Those are things that are of God. And he says, therefore, just like an artist might put himself into his masterpiece, there's something special about human beings, every one of them. And therefore, they should always be treated with an intrinsic value. Each person is valuable, even the disgusting ones. and a dignity, just like Jesus treated Zacchaeus like a human being. That there's a value and a dignity, and that is how we should treat people, even when they're at their worst. That they are still worthy of value and dignity. This is a huge, this concept has shaped Western society in many ways. Here's Christopher Wright. He says, this forms the basis of the radical equality of human beings. 10 out of 10 people in our culture would agree that all people are equal. But you ever wonder where that idea comes from? That's a Judeo-Christian idea. It says it forms the basis of the radical equality of human beings, regardless of gender, ethnicity, religion, or any form of social, economic, or political status. Christian mission must therefore treat all human beings with dignity, equality, and respect. When we look at any other person, we do not see the label, but the image of God. We see someone created by God, addressed by God, accountable to God, loved by God, and valued and evaluated by God. That is a completely different lens to view people through. The alternative to seeing someone as created in the image is to view them with disgust. I've been using this word disgust. Let's think about that word. What does it mean to be disgusted with someone else? My grandma used to always say that. If I did something wrong, she'd say, that's disgusting. It's a powerful word. What's it mean? In the book Diary of a Wimpy Kid, there is a story of a schoolyard tale of the cheese touch. This is a story of a piece of cheese that, origins unknown, appeared one day on the blacktop out at recess. And everyone saw it and stayed away from it. What was remarkable about this piece of cheese was that it stayed there for many, many days and became hard and moldy and unrecognizable, and therefore, among the students, took on a legendary status as a landmark out on the playground of the cheese. Everyone knew about the cheese, and everyone knew to stay away from the cheese. Then one day, this one kid touched the cheese. And he discovered to his horror that his status was forever changed. Everyone ran away from him. They fled, they stayed away from him, and they declared that he now had the cheese touch, and that anyone who touched him would also have the cheese touch and must be stayed away from at all costs. That's what I think of when I think of the idea of being disgusted. I think that actually describes pretty well how a lot of people in our culture think about a lot of other people in our culture as having the cheese touch. The problem with this kind of thinking from a biblical point of view is that it is dehumanizing. The problem with disgust is that it downgrades someone from image bearer to something less than image bearer, something slightly less than human, and it robs them of the dignity that they have as someone who is created by God. It is dehumanizing. Donald Trump is a human being. Joe Biden is a human being. Now, if one of those two statements made you uncomfortable, you might be harboring a dehumanizing level of disgust in your heart. Stetzer says, disgust whittles an entire person down to one struggle, one sin, one issue. Disgust is dehumanizing and not of Jesus. Disgust halts any and all engagement like a bad odor or a revolting sight. Disgust stops us in our tracks and prevents us from getting any closer to someone. Disgust will pervade our interactions. It will inform our quick dismissal of others and even justify the harsh language we use to describe others. This is practically destructive to mission and highlights Christians at their worst. And ultimately, none of us can hide our feelings of revulsion. Disgust smells, and people catch the scent. People know when you're disgusted with them. And it's very hard to love them when you're doing that. There's another problem with disgust. Not only does disgust halt engagement, it also distorts our view of our own sin. We reveal that we think we are worthy and good, while they are unworthy and bad. We cannot feel disgust without stating an opinion about ourselves in the process. So here's a challenge. Who disgusts you? Get an actual person in your mind, a public figure, a person online, a person in your family, a person in your home church. But don't look at them, because they'll know right now. Just keep looking straight ahead. Okay, someone who disgusts you. Here's what I'll say about that. Your disgust is probably totally reasonable. But it also isn't doing any good. And so how about sitting down with God and saying, God, I need your help to get my view of that person more like your view of that person. I have had to repent for my disgust of other human beings before, more than once. And a good place to start is by praying for them, because I'm bringing God into the picture. So number one is we need to view them as created in the image of God. Number two is we need to view them with empathy. Stetzer said this is the solution for our disgust: cultivating the same love toward the world that Christ showed us. This empathic love, the ability to understand and relate to the experiences of others, is powerfully winsome. Can I take a moment and try to get over in their shoes? When Jesus came and surveyed the sin of the world in Israel in Matthew 9, it says, seeing the people, he felt disgust. No, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited like sheep without a shepherd. He's like, oh man, these guys are so broken and lost. Empathy is to understand that the world is broken. For me too. And that people, including me, need God and not rejection. And the opposite of that would be fixating on what is wrong with them and then acting out in outrage. Stetzer says, we do not need to sacrifice our revulsion of sin. Okay, that's an important line, because maybe you're sitting here and you're like, no, I can't buy this, Ben, because it sounds like you're saying I should excuse evil and sin. Should I just pretend that what that person did isn't wrong and destructive? Should I just, accommodate and let people do all kinds of evil things? No, that's not what I'm saying. God judges sin. God gets angry about the destructive things that we do to each other. This is in no way backing down from calling something wrong that is wrong. Okay? I'm not talking about downplaying other people's sin. I'm talking about downplaying your role as judge. There is a God. He will judge. You're not him. He will completely and fairly judge. Every sin will be answered for, probably beyond what you're even comfortable with. And it will be settled either by the blood of Christ or by the person's own blood. So God is just. It's that I'm not, and that takes humility and faith. Humility to acknowledge I'm not the judge, and faith to believe that he will actually do something to right things that are wrong. It helps to distinguish between being angry at things that aren't right in this world. It's okay to feel anger that something terrible happens or is happening. But that's different than outrage, where I put on my hat of bringing retribution, and that's really about me getting back at you. That's outrage. Stetzer says, we do not need to sacrifice our revulsion of sin, but rather reframe how we see those caught in its power. We know the corrosive yet alluring power of sin that entangles this world. We all have sin. And we know the freedom and relief that come from being reconciled to the Father. We need to use that understanding to demonstrate an empathic love to the lost, ensuring that they know they can approach us with confidence that they will receive mercy and grace that was first shown to us. Oh, how can I treat people with mercy and grace? Well, that's exactly how God treats you. Which leads to our third point, which is humility. So I need to see them as created in God's image. I need to cultivate empathy and view them through the lens of empathy, and I need to view them through the lens of humility, which is simply to acknowledge that I'm not so perfect myself. That God's had to show me mercy and grace to accept me. Pride drives us to obsession with winning and tribalism. My cause, my people, my victory, my point against you. But humility leads us to empathy and listening and forbearance, which are all key ingredients of actually healthy relating with people you disagree with. You have to be able to try to understand where they're coming from. That's empathy. You have to be able to listen to them. Half of all conflicts is just people feeling unheard. Have you ever noticed that? You ever said to someone, I feel like we're talking past each other? That's because you are. What you actually mean is we're both refusing to listen to the other, is what we're saying. Listening disarms conflicts in a major way, because at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is convey our ideas to each other. But listening takes humility, because it means that I might actually learn something from this disgusting person, and I might actually be wrong. Do you have a category that some of your most strongly held convictions might actually be wrong? I know, it's gross what I'm saying. It's because humility, that's really hard for us. Stetzer says, humility is not losing. It's not weakness or cowardliness. This is a lie of our outrage-fueled culture, that meekness and humility are inferior to the screech and bellowing of the arrogant. In contrast, humble love that is submitted to kingdom mission is incredibly powerful. The willingness to lower yourself by listening and understanding the culture, worldview, and background of those you engage opens the door for communicating the gospel of love. It reveals that you are interested in winning the person instead of the debate. And it's a winning strategy because God is opposed to the proud and gives grace to the humble. Well, to conclude, he says, nowhere is there a love that overcomes the barriers of death, sin, captivity, separation, fear, alienation, and purposelessness, except at the cross. There is hope for racial reconciliation, for peace between the sexes, for ethnic harmony, and for healing when we rally around a common identity in Christ, when we love him as our Redeemer, and we serve his kingdom. This is the vision of the New Testament. This is what God is after. When we talk about God building his kingdom, he's talking about gathering people from every stripe, from every category and faction, from every worldview and way of thinking, under the umbrella of his love, adopted into the family of God, just like Zacchaeus. And that's worth keeping in mind when you're interacting with people who make you crazy, is that you might be spending eternity with them as brothers and sisters. So you should remember that. And I know you're like, that vision will never happen because we're completely different and we will always disagree. And you know what? You're right. We will always be different. The distinction is that difference will not be the most important thing about you, because it'll be superseded by something more important, which is your adoption into God's family. And you're right. You will always disagree with people in your life. That's why you should practice getting better at humility and listening and empathy. I think a wrong conclusion here is that we should shrink back and not engage one another. I'm not saying, therefore, let's just make all those controversial things taboo and be like, la, 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 we love each other. That's not what I'm saying. We do need to engage in these conversations with each other. We may even need to engage in our society for good. We should be influences for good in our society, actively. But we need to do it as though we're interacting with image bearers, with humility, and with empathy. That's what I'm trying to say. So don't let your ideology supersede your theology, a trap that many Christians have fallen into. Basically, I'm saying we need to see people with love. So guys, earlier I asked you, who disgusts you? Here's my challenge, is to wrestle with this question. What is it that you wish for that person? What's your prayer for that person who disgusts you? Your impulse is for them to go away or be publicly embarrassed or stopped. Is that what you really want for them? Or would it be better for them to take the next step toward God, toward redemption, like Zacchaeus? I think that's a good challenge to think through. What am I really going to pray for that person who disgusts me? And also, if you're sitting here this morning thinking, you keep talking about lost people, I don't know if I'm lost or not. Well, what I want to say to you is that the Bible is clear that we are all lost until we receive the forgiveness of Jesus Christ and begin a relationship with God. We're all lost until we call out to him and say, yes, I want to begin a relationship with you. And that his offer for that is on the table this morning. Revelation 3:20 says, "Look, I stand at the door and knock. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and we will share a meal together as friends." Jesus invited himself over to Zacchaeus' house, and he has invited himself over to your house. He's actually at the door. The question is, will you open the door? Will you acknowledge your lostness and let him in?